The old wooden gate splintered inward with a thunderous crack, and before I could even set down my coffee, a man I had never seen before came charging onto my land, waving a gun in the air and screaming at the top of his lungs about HOA violations. His face was red, twisted with rage, spittle flying from his mouth as he stormed up to my porch like he owned the place. Except he didn't. I wasn't part of any HOA. I never had been. He just didn't know it yet. And he definitely didn't know he was about to rack up an 800-0 mistake. What do you do when the HOA decides you belong to them, and they're stupid enough to bring a gun to prove it? It started small, almost laughable, like a mosquito buzzing around your ear that you swat away without thinking. The first sign was a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. A half-crumpled notice warning me of a violation regarding unauthorized fencing modifications. I chuckled when I read it, because the only fence on my property had been there since my grandfather built it, and the nearest neighbor was nearly a mile away. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash, figuring it was some mistake, some bored busybody who got lost trying to play suburban sheriff. A week later, another one arrived, this time nailed to the old oak at the edge of my driveway. Unauthorized livestock structures, it said, citing some supposed regulation number in fine print. I didn't own livestock, not anymore, not since my last old mare passed, but the barn had stood there for decades, leaning stubbornly against time and weather. The thing that irked me wasn't the notice itself. It was the nail, driven right into living wood, right into something that had stood longer than any of these newcomers had lived within 100 miles of here. I ripped it down, tossed it into the same trash can, and went back to fixing the west fence line. I figured it would end there, just a stray Karen or Carl who would realize eventually they were wasting their time. I was wrong. 2 days later, I found a bright orange sticker slapped across my front gate, the kind you see used for condemned buildings or hazardous sites. In bold, aggressive letters, it read, "Non-compliant property, subject to administrative action." My stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity. I peeled it off carefully, my fingers moving slow and deliberate, feeling every rip of adhesive against the weathered wood. That was no random act. Somebody was organizing this. Somebody thought they had authority. I went inside, grabbed my dusty folder of old deeds and land surveys, and spent the better part of the evening flipping through yellowed pages, tracing back every inch of property line, every legal description. It was all there in black and white, my land, my rules. No HOA listed, no covenants signed. I had been meticulous when I bought this place years ago, making damn sure no HOA nonsense could ever touch me. Whoever was pulling this stunt either didn't know or didn't care. It escalated from there. Mysterious cars started cruising slowly past my property, their windows dark, their plates always just a little too dirty to read clearly. Once, I found tire tracks cutting through the soft dirt near the south pasture, too fresh to be anything but deliberate. Another morning, I woke to find a strange plastic cone placed neatly in the middle of my driveway, like some kind of absurd warning or marker. It had the letters O stenciled on it in black spray paint. That same night, my mailbox was shoved crooked, leaning like a drunk, with another unsigned notice stuffed inside. Final warning: comply or face penalties. The arrogance seeped through every word, as if daring me to fight back, as if assuming I was just another spineless suburbanite who would tremble at the sight of an official-looking letterhead. I didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, my blood was simmering, but I forced myself to stay cold, to stay deliberate. I installed trail cams at every entrance, hidden well behind brush and trees, catching wide angles of every vehicle and footstep near my boundaries. I bought a new secure mailbox, bolted into solid steel posts sunk deep into the ground. I printed out copies of my land deeds, multiple sets, and kept them in a fireproof safe. Every interaction, every incident, every petty intimidation, I documented it all with timestamps, photos, and videos. I wasn't going to fight this war with fists or shouting matches. I was going to fight it with paperwork, with evidence, with the slow, unstoppable force of law. About a month in, when the air had gotten colder and the trees began to shed their leaves in mournful rustles, I finally met the man behind the madness. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of crisp, biting day that smells like wood smoke and coming frost. I was stacking firewood near the porch when a gleaming black SUV rumbled up the driveway, ignoring my private property no trespassing signs like they were invisible. It stopped in a spray of gravel, and out stepped a man in a navy blazer, khakis, and a smugness that seemed to ooze from his very pores. He carried a clipboard like a weapon and wore a shiny HOA badge on a lanyard around his neck, as if that trinket somehow gave him dominion over everything he could see. He approached with the entitled strut of a man who had never been punched for overstepping, who had spent his whole life confusing authority with power. His first words weren't, "Hello," or "May I help you?" but, "You're in clear violation of HOA standards, sir, and corrective measures must be taken immediately." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply stared at him, feeling that old iron weight settle into my chest, the one that came from years of dealing with bureaucrats who thought papers and words were shields against reality. He kept talking, spitting out acronyms and fine threats like confetti, citing sections and bylaws from some covenant I had never signed, never agreed to. I let him finish his little speech, let him feel important, let him hang himself with every smug word. Then, when the silence finally caught up to him, and he shifted uneasily under my stare, I spoke. "I'm not in your HOA," I said quietly, the words slicing sharper than any shout. "This land has never been part of your association. I have no contract with you, no obligations, no jurisdiction. Now get off my property." He blinked, his mouth working like a fish gasping for air. Then, like a man doubling down on a bad hand, he puffed up and wagged his clipboard at me. "Failure to comply will result in escalating penalties," he said, his voice cracking just slightly at the edges. "We have the authority to fine, to lien, to—" "You have the authority," I cut him off, stepping closer until I could smell the aftershave and cowardice rolling off him in waves. "To leave. Now." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then he muttered something under his breath, turned on his polished heel, and stomped back to his SUV, his tires throwing up a rooster tail of dirt as he sped away. I stood there, long after he was gone, the woodpile forgotten at my feet, staring down the empty driveway. I knew, without a shred of doubt, that this wasn't over. Men like that don't take rejection well, especially not when they're used to getting their way. In the days that followed, the harassment shifted gears. I started receiving fake invoices in the mail, demanding thousands of dollars in fines for laughable infractions, unapproved exterior paint color for my barn's faded red siding, unsanctioned agricultural activity for my vegetable garden, even unauthorized animal husbandry, because a neighbor's stray cat liked to sun itself on my porch. The absurdity of it was almost comical, if it hadn't been so calculated. Each notice came with a threat, escalating fines, legal action, property liens, all from an HOA I wasn't even part of. Neighbors I barely knew began to treat me differently, some looking away when they passed me on the road, others giving me wary, apologetic glances. It was clear someone was poisoning the well, spinning tales of me as the problem neighbor, the dangerous outsider who refused to play nice. I didn't fight it. I didn't defend myself. I just kept collecting evidence, stacking it higher and higher, waiting for the weight of their own stupidity to crush them. The final straw came one chilly morning when I found a folded letter jammed into the crack of my front door. No envelope, no stamp, just a hastily folded piece of HOA letterhead with a single sentence scrawled across it in bold, furious strokes. Final notice. Compliance inspection scheduled. Resistance will result in escalation. No date, no signature, no warning, just a threat. I smiled when I read it, a cold, grim smile that probably would have unsettled a wiser man. Because what they didn't know, what they hadn't bothered to learn in all their arrogant blustering, was that escalation was something I had been trained for. They wanted a war? Fine. They were about to find out what it meant to pick a fight with someone who didn't just know how to stand his ground, but who had already mapped out every step of the battlefield. They had just declared open season on the wrong damn ranch. The escalation wasn't subtle, it was an infection, spreading fast, an organized sickness infecting every inch of my ranch. It started 3 days after that last unsigned threat with my eastern fence line, barbed wire cleanly snipped, the severed strands curling like broken fingers toward the dry winter grass. Someone had cut it, no question about it, and not in some clumsy random way either. It was surgical, deliberate, a clean slice at the corner post where the cattle gate once swung. Even though I hadn't run livestock in years, a broken fence meant something here. It meant an open invitation for every wild hog, stray dog, or drunken hunter to come wandering through. It meant exposure, vulnerability. I stood there under the rising sun, the wire still trembling slightly from the night's cold, and I felt a different kind of tremble rise in my chest. The kind that only comes when your home is no longer your sanctuary. I spent the next 6 hours restringing that section of fence, every pull of the wire a knot twisting tighter in my gut, every hammer strike sinking deeper into the certainty that this was no longer just about petty notices. They were coming for me, slow and stupid and sure, like a pack of scavengers that hadn't realized yet they were hunting something that could bite back. The sabotage didn't stop at the fence. 2 mornings later, I found another official notice nailed to the side of my barn, this time with 3 separate nails, driven deep like they wanted to make sure it bled. Citation: unauthorized agricultural equipment storage. Immediate remediation required. Below that, in smaller letters barely legible against the faded red wood, it warned of forcible abatement measures if I didn't voluntarily comply within 48 hours. I stared at that piece of paper for a long time, longer than I needed to read it. The hammer marks around the nails, standing out like bruises against the weathered boards. The barn, that old stubborn heartbeat of this land, had stood for generations, sheltering horses, cattle, equipment, dreams. And now they thought they could deface it with their petty threats. I pulled the notice down slowly, the nails creaking in protest, then folded it once, twice, 3 times until it was a neat little square. I slid it into the growing file folder in my kitchen, next to the photos of the tire tracks, the video stills from the trail cams, the time-stamped copies of every threatening letter and false citation. Evidence. Ammunition. One day soon, they were going to regret every single piece of paper they'd ever touched. But the worst part wasn't the paper or the fences. It was the people. They started coming onto my land like it was theirs, like they had some God-given right to inspect, to judge, to control. One afternoon, while fixing a loose shutter on the 2nd story, I caught movement out by the east pasture. 2 figures in neon vests, clipboard in one hand, measuring tape in the other, picking their way through the tall grass like surveyors. I watched them for a full minute before descending the ladder. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked, boots sinking slow and heavy into the ground, every step deliberate. When they finally noticed me, one of them, a wiry man with sunglasses too big for his face, lifted his clipboard like a shield. "Official HOA inspection," he said. The words practiced, bored, like he'd said it 100 times before and expected me to nod and step aside. I didn't. "This isn't HOA land," I said, voice flat, almost tired. "You're trespassing." The second one, a stockier guy with a baseball cap pulled low, snickered. "All land inside the Oak Ridge development falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. Standard compliance checks. Nothing personal." "Show me the paperwork," I said, not moving an inch closer. "Show me where it says this property is under your control." The wiry one shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his clipboard, but I could see the truth in his body language. They had nothing but arrogance and fake authority. "Non-compliance will be noted," the stocky one said instead, snapping the tape measure back into its case like he was holstering a weapon. They turned to leave, walking slow, deliberately slow, trying to leave the stink of intimidation in their wake. I didn't follow. I didn't call after them. I just watched, memorizing their gaits, their body language, the way they cut across the field like they owned it. I memorized it all and fed it to the cold machine building inside me, the machine that wasn't fueled by rage or fear, but by inevitability. They thought they were writing a story here, thought they were casting themselves as heroes in some grand struggle against the unruly outsider. What they didn't realize was that I was already writing the ending. Over the next few weeks, the trespassing became routine, almost scheduled. They came during the daylight hours, when they assumed I'd be at work, poking around my sheds, measuring distances between structures, taking photos of my barns and fences and garden beds. They nailed new fake citations to my trees, tucked warnings into my screen door, left aggressive voicemail messages quoting rules and penalties that didn't apply. I caught them twice more on my cameras, once rifling through my woodpile, once standing around my well pump, poking it like it was some alien artifact. Each time, I saved the footage, downloaded it to redundant drives, made physical copies, stored backups in off-site locations. It wasn't enough to win. I needed to bury them in undeniable proof so deep that no court, no council, no board could ever dig them out. I started making my own preparations too, quietly, methodically. I called in some favors from an old friend who worked real estate law. I met with a county surveyor to reaffirm the property boundaries, getting signed and sealed maps proving beyond a shadow of a doubt where my land began and theirs ended. I filed a formal request with the recorder's office to pull every public document regarding the HOA's establishment and boundaries. I double-checked the covenants and restrictions recorded against all neighboring parcels, mine included. And every scrap of evidence told the same story. I was not, and never had been, part of their jurisdiction. While they played at power with fake notices and cheap intimidation, I was building a bunker made of paper, of affidavits, of official signatures and notarized declarations. I wasn't just preparing to defend myself, I was preparing to annihilate them. But they kept coming, like moths to a flame they didn't understand. One morning just before sunrise, I found fresh boot prints around my tool shed, mud-caked soles pressed deep into the thawing ground, pacing back and forth, lingering too long by the lock. A message, if you were stupid enough to think that footprints were a threat. That same night, I installed motion-activated floodlights along the property lines, invisible to the eye until triggered, capable of lighting up the dark like a prison yard at escape time. The first time they tripped it, I was watching from the second-floor window, coffee in one hand, the other resting casually on the cold barrel of my old lever-action rifle. I didn't need to point it. I didn't need to step outside. The blinding light and the hum of cameras clicking in the trees were enough. They ran, stumbling over each other in their desperation to get clear of the brilliance. It was beautiful in a way, like watching cockroaches scatter when the kitchen light snaps on. Still, they didn't stop. They were too arrogant, too stupid, too committed to their fantasy of control. I could have called the sheriff then, filed trespassing charges, maybe even gotten a few of them arrested. But I waited. I wanted the weight of their crimes to be undeniable, cumulative, crushing. One or two incidents could be written off as misunderstandings, but a campaign of harassment, vandalism, trespassing, threats, that would be a different story. One no judge could ignore. And so I let them come. I let them expose themselves. Every trespass, every threat, every sneer captured in pixels and paper and signatures. I let them dig their own graves with every fake citation and cowardly midnight visit. I watched. I waited. And I built the hammer that was going to fall on them so hard they'd never crawl out from under it again. They thought they were enforcing rules. They thought they were taming a wild rancher who didn't know how to play by their petty little suburban commandments. What they didn't realize was that they weren't enforcing anything. They were trespassers, criminals, and every step they took across my line was another nail in the coffin I was building for them. The trap was almost ready. All I needed was one more push. One more act of stupidity from a group that had already proven they had no brakes, no common sense, and no idea the kind of storm they were about to unleash. They were coming. I could feel it like the charged air before a lightning strike. And when they crossed the final line, When they made that one fatal mistake, I would be waiting, not with anger, not with fear, but with the quiet, cold inevitability of justice sharpening its blade. It happened just after dawn on a Sunday morning, the sky still bruised with the last stubborn remnants of night, a chill clinging to the air that smelled like wet earth and the distant promise of rain. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, the steam curling lazily toward the ceiling, when the quiet was shattered by the screech of tires tearing across gravel. My body went still. Coffee cup paused halfway to my lips, ears straining against the silence that followed. Then, a slamming door, the sound sharp and violent, like a shot fired into the calm. I rose slowly, heart beating steady and hard, and moved toward the front window, peering through the curtains just in time to see him, the HOA president himself, storming up my driveway like a lunatic, a handgun glinting black and ugly in the rising light. His blazer was wrinkled, one shirt tail untucked, his face a mottled red, veins bulging in his neck as he screamed words I couldn't quite catch through the double-pane glass, but the meaning was clear enough. Rage, entitlement, madness. I stayed where I was, muscles coiled tight, watching him stomp toward the porch with the erratic, jerking steps of a man fueled by pure hate and bad decisions. My cameras were already recording, one tucked under the eaves, another hidden behind a fake birdhouse on the fence, a third peeking from inside a hollowed fence post. Every frame, every snarl on his twisted face, was being captured in crisp, undeniable detail. I moved methodically, setting the coffee cup down without a sound, my right hand reaching for the old rotary phone bolted to the wall near the pantry. I dialed the sheriff's number from memory, the line clicking softly in my ear as it connected. "Dispatch," came the voice, calm and professional. "This is Mark Ellis, out on Dry Creek Road." I said, my voice low even. "Got an armed trespasser. HOA president. He's shouting threats on my property. I have video. Send deputies." "Understood, sir. Stay on the line. Units en route." I didn't stay on the line. I placed the handset down gently, eyes never leaving the man now bellowing up at my porch like some medieval warlord, the gun swinging wildly in his hand as he barked orders to an invisible army. I could finally hear his words through the glass, broken into frantic, furious fragments. "Violation. Defiance. Compliance by force if necessary." He stomped up the steps, boots crashing against the wood, and with a sudden jerk, he kicked open the screen door so hard the hinges ripped free, the whole thing clattering against the house with a hollow, broken sound. My hands stayed loose, open, neutral at my sides. No sudden movements. No reason for him to panic and squeeze that trigger. "You were warned!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth, eyes wild and shining. "You were told! You have refused!" Under Article 17C of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Charter, I am authorized to enforce compliance through any means necessary. The barrel of the gun jerked upward, gesturing broadly toward my home like he was blessing it for demolition. I stayed still, the porch light catching on the lens of the tiny camera mounted just above the doorframe, recording every insane second. "You need to leave," I said, voice calm, deliberate, the kind of voice you use with wild animals and armed lunatics alike. "This is private property. You have no jurisdiction here. You are committing multiple felonies right now. Put the weapon down and leave." He let out a sound, something between a laugh and a snarl, and stomped down off the porch, pacing in a wide circle, muttering to himself, the gun swinging dangerously with every step. I caught snatches of his ranting, something about fines, something about court orders that didn't exist, something about cleansing the neighborhood. I saw the moment he made his decision, saw it flicker across his face like a shadow. He turned abruptly and stalked toward my truck, parked in the gravel circle by the barn. Without hesitation, he raised the pistol and smashed the butt against the side mirror, shattering it in a spray of glass. Then he turned and kicked at the front bumper, stomping like a toddler in the throes of a tantrum, denting the steel with his heel. Still, I didn't move. I stayed behind the safety of the thick oak door, watching, recording, building the case in real time. Every act of destruction, every violent gesture, every shouted threat, catalogued, preserved, ready to be played back in front of a judge who wouldn't need more than 5 minutes to see exactly what kind of monster this man had become. The shriek of sirens split the morning air, growing louder by the second, and I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. For the first time, he seemed to realize that maybe he had gone too far. Maybe this wasn't going to end with him striding back to the HOA boardroom as some conquering hero. He turned toward his SUV, still idling at the end of my drive, but it was too late. 2 sheriff's cruisers roared onto the property, tires throwing up dirt, lights flashing red and blue against the grim gray sky. Deputies spilled out, guns drawn, shouting commands sharp and precise. "Drop the weapon! Hands in the air, now!" The HOA president froze, the gun wavering in his grip, then clattered to the ground, the clumsy clang of metal on stone punctuating the sudden heavy silence. He raised his hands, palms outward, face twitching with the effort to force a look of innocence onto features still twisted with rage. The deputies swarmed him, cuffing his hands behind his back, reading him his rights as they frisked him against the side of his vehicle. I stepped outside finally, slow and deliberate, hands visible, face neutral. The senior deputy, an older man named Cates who I'd seen around town for years, met my eyes over the hood of his cruiser. "You good, Mark?" he asked, voice clipped but not unkind. "I'm good," I said. "Got everything on video, too. Cameras picked up the whole thing." "Good," he nodded grimly. "We're gonna need it." Another deputy, a younger one, approached me with a small, grim smile. "We're charging him with trespassing, vandalism, making terroristic threats, brandishing a firearm, and unlawful entry. That just for starters. Anything else you want to add? Feel free to stop by the station." I nodded, my heart still beating slow and steady, the adrenaline cooling into a deep, satisfied certainty. They had wanted escalation. They had wanted a confrontation. Well, they had it now, just not the kind they were ready for. As they loaded the HOA president into the back of a cruiser, I caught his eyes one last time. Gone was the bravado, the smugness, the delusions of grandeur. What remained was fear, raw and cold, the kind that seeps into the bones and doesn't wash out. I held his gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of what he'd done settle between us. This wasn't over, not yet. This was just the beginning. The break-in was a trigger, a catalyst, the final piece of evidence I needed to crush the whole rotten edifice of their petty little empire. The sheriff's office would take care of the criminal charges. I would take care of the civil war that was about to break over their heads like a tidal wave. Inside, I sat back down at the kitchen table, the coffee now cold and forgotten. I opened the heavy folder that had become my shield and sword, flipping through page after page of evidence, photos, documents, recordings. I added a fresh sheet to the stack: date, time, incident description, arrest report, pending. Then I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, staring out the window as the sun finally broke over the horizon, setting the field ablaze in molten gold. They had crossed the line. They had brought the war to my doorstep, guns and all. And now, they were about to learn the true cost of picking a fight with someone who knew how to fight back. Slow and legal and lethal. Not with fists, not with rage, but with the cold, relentless machinery of law grinding down everything they had built until there was nothing left but dust and regret. The cameras had seen it all, and soon so would everyone else. The fallout didn't come all at once. It oozed through the community like toxic sludge, slow at first, sticky, clinging to everything it touched. After the sheriff's deputies dragged the HOA president off my land in handcuffs, a heavy silence settled over the ranch. For the first time in months, no trucks crawled past my fence. No strangers trespassed with clipboards and bad intentions. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet you get before a flood. Sure enough, 2 days later, the flood came. Not with armed men or sneaky midnight visits, but with a smear campaign so clumsy and desperate it would have been hilarious if it hadn't been aimed at destroying me. It started on the local community board, a poorly moderated corner of the internet where rumors grew faster than weeds after a spring rain. Suddenly there were anonymous posts claiming I had threatened the HOA president first, that I had brandished a weapon, that I had attacked him when he was only trying to enforce safety standards for the good of the neighborhood. The lies multiplied like bacteria, each one more absurd than the last. Somehow, I had gone from being a stubborn landowner to a deranged militia member plotting against my own neighbors. And right behind the rumors came the doctored evidence, grainy, chopped-up security footage clearly edited to make it seem like I had lunged at the president first, that he was merely defending himself. They must have had some tech-savvy crony working overtime, slicing and splicing frames until reality itself was bent to their pathetic narrative. They released edited videos, doctored screenshots, even fabricated witness statements from supposed neighbors who claimed to have seen me threaten HOA officials in the past. It would have been laughable if they hadn't spread it so widely, so fast, like a fire set deliberately in dry grass. But what they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this from the start. Every fake notice, every trespass, every act of vandalism, they were all documented, unaltered, time-stamped, witnessed. I didn't panic. I didn't flail. I called my lawyer. His name was Daniel Cross, a man with a face like weathered stone and a reputation for taking pleasure in methodically dismantling liars in court. He was semi-retired, selective about his cases, but when I laid the evidence out in front of him, when he watched the raw, unedited footage of the break-in and saw the smug little kingpin waving his gun around like a toy, Daniel's face barely changed. He just said, "We're going to gut them." It wasn't just Daniel. I also contacted a state investigator who specialized in property fraud and HOA abuse cases. Apparently, our little HOA wasn't exactly unique when it came to overstepping boundaries, though few others had been stupid enough to bring firearms into the mix. The investigator's name was Gina Morales, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, who showed up on my porch one windy morning with a battered leather satchel and a half-smirk that told me she already suspected she was going to enjoy this case. Together, we started building a fortress. I gave them everything: copies of the raw security footage from every camera, timestamps cross-referenced with the sheriff's dispatch logs, signed affidavits from my neighbors who had witnessed the harassment firsthand. It turned out I wasn't the only one they'd targeted. Once word spread that I was fighting back with the law instead of fists, more neighbors came forward. There was old Mr. Davis 2 properties down, whose driveway they'd tried to seize by claiming it was common HOA maintenance space, and who had received a notice demanding he demolish his workshop. There was the Martinez family, newly moved in, who'd been fined 3 separate times for unauthorized planting, when all they had done was set up a vegetable garden in their backyard. And then there was Marie Jensen, the retired teacher who lived near the creek, who sobbed quietly as she handed me a manila folder filled with photographs of her property, vandalized after she refused to pay a sudden compliance fee that had never existed before last year. Each story was another nail in the coffin. Each affidavit was another pound of weight crushing their fabricated narrative. Gina pieced it together with brutal efficiency, following the paper trail, finding inconsistencies in their so-called bylaws, exposing forged meeting minutes and unrecorded votes where they had supposedly granted themselves the authority to do whatever they pleased. Daniel prepared the civil suits like a man setting traps along a game trail, baiting them with their own arrogance, their own sloppy mistakes. Meanwhile, the HOA board tried to circle the wagons. They held emergency meetings, closed to non-members, where they plotted new strategies. They issued statements filled with vague references to ongoing investigations and misunderstandings blown out of proportion by disgruntled individuals. They begged sympathy from the few neighbors, still foolish enough to believe their nonsense, spinning themselves as victims of a coordinated smear campaign led by hostile elements. But it wasn't working. Not anymore. The tide had turned. At one point, they even tried to bribe me. An unmarked envelope appeared one afternoon, tucked under my windshield wiper, containing a handwritten note offering to drop all pending HOA actions, if I agreed to publicly acknowledge a misunderstanding, and sign a non-disparagement agreement. The note was accompanied by check, made out to me personally for $20,000. Blood money. Hush money. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Gina and Daniel were already working to expose everything. The check, the note, the fingerprints on the envelope, all of it became more evidence stacked against them. And still, the HOA president, even from behind bars where he was awaiting trial on multiple charges, tried to spin it. He hired a PR firm, one used by politicians and failed CEOs, to release carefully crafted press releases about an unfortunate misunderstanding stemming from deep-seated community tensions. He gave interviews through his lawyer, painting himself as a victim of property extremism, claiming he had only drawn the gun because he feared for his life. When confronted by a hostile anti-HOA radical, every word he spoke dripped with lies. Every statement was a shovel digging his grave deeper. Because we had the truth. We had video of him smashing my truck. We had audio recordings of him screaming threats. We had footage of him invading my porch, gun in hand, before ever seeing my face that morning. We had emails, obtained legally through discovery, where he and several board members openly discussed escalating pressure tactics to force compliance on resistant outliers. We had internal memos where they joked about pushing the boundaries of enforcement and dealing with troublemakers creatively. The noose tightened. By the end of the month, Gina had compiled a report thicker than a Sunday newspaper, detailing every act of malfeasance, every procedural violation, every illegal enforcement action taken by the HOA board over the past 3 years. Daniel filed a massive civil suit, not just against the HOA president personally, but against the HOA itself, its board members, and their individual insurance bonds. The lawsuit sought damages for trespassing, harassment, emotional distress, property damage, and punitive damages for malicious intent. The numbers weren't small. The total demand, $800,000. They tried to delay, they tried to deflect, but there was nowhere left to hide. Their own words, their own actions, their own hubris had built the gallows they now swung from. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I waited, quiet and patient, knowing that the final blow was coming. The truth, once unleashed, has a way of destroying even the strongest fortresses of lies. They had mistaken stubbornness for weakness. They had mistaken caution for fear. They had mistaken a man who just wanted to be left alone for a man who wouldn't fight back. And now they were about to learn the most important lesson of all. When you pick a fight with someone who builds his battles brick by brick, evidence by evidence, you don't just lose. You get buried. The day of reckoning didn't dawn with fanfare. It was an ordinary morning, cold and clear, the kind where the sky looks scrubbed clean and the air bites sharp against your skin. But beneath that ordinary sky, inside that small beige county courthouse that smelled faintly of old coffee and older paper, something extraordinary was about to happen. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands steady, documents neatly stacked in front of me, my lawyer Daniel Cross at my side in his usual battered briefcase and immovable expression. Across the aisle sat the HOA president, paler now, thinner, a man hollowed out by fear, pretending he still had a spine. His lawyers, 3 of them in slick suits, whispered frantically, flipping through binders and tapping on tablets, but nothing they could conjure was going to save him today. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a plea for understanding. This was a reckoning written in black ink, signed by every piece of evidence, every affidavit, every video clip, every scar carved into my land and my life by their arrogance. The judge entered, an older woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had long ago lost any tolerance for nonsense. She took her seat, glanced through the initial filings, and without ceremony said, "Let's get this underway." "Plaintiff's counsel, you may proceed." Daniel rose, his voice steady, almost bored, as he began to lay out the case. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. He presented the property records first, proving without a shadow of a doubt that my ranch had never, in any capacity, been subject to HOA governance. No covenants, no contracts, no signatures, no authority. Then came the security footage, grainy but clear, of the HOA president storming onto my land, gun in hand, screaming threats, destroying property, terrorizing my family. The sound in the courtroom was the low mechanical whir of the video playback, broken only by the occasional cough or shifting of a chair. No one spoke. No one dared to. Daniel brought out the photographs next. The damaged fence lines, the smashed truck mirror, the vandalized mailbox, the notices illegally nailed to my barn. One by one, he built the wall around them, higher and higher, until there was no path out, no way to scale the lies they had tried to hide behind. He read aloud from the HOA's own internal emails, the ones joking about breaking resistant homeowners, the ones bragging about forcing compliance through unofficial pressure and unrecorded enforcement actions. He presented sworn statements from my neighbors, each one a quiet dagger plunging deeper into the heart of their fabricated defense. Then he delivered the coup de grace, a formal declaration from the state property commissioner affirming that the HOA had illegally attempted to exercise control over land that was never and could never be under their jurisdiction. That piece of paper alone would have been enough to obliterate their case, but Daniel wasn't just going for victory, he was going for annihilation. He closed the plaintiff's presentation by calmly stating the damages: 150, 0 for property damage, 250, 0 for emotional distress, 200, 0 for punitive damages due to malicious intent, and an additional 200, 0 to cover the legal costs and the full restoration of my property and reputation. Total demand, 800, 0. A figure so high that the president visibly flinched, his face draining of what little color remained. The defense tried to push back. They argued that the president had been acting under the belief that he had legal authority, that his actions, while excessive, were born of community responsibility. They played the edited video, the one where the president looked like he was being attacked. It lasted all of 30 seconds before Daniel stood and calmly submitted the full, unedited footage for comparison. The judge watched both, side by side, her face unreadable. When the second video ended, showing the president storming onto my porch before I even stepped outside, she set down her pen with a quiet, decisive click. I find the defendant's evidence to be materially altered and intentionally misleading, she said, her voice like a blade slicing through the hushed courtroom. I further find the plaintiff's evidence to be overwhelming, credible, and damning. There was no long deliberation. There was no dramatic waiting for a jury. The judge ruled, then and there. Judgment in favor of the plaintiff. Full damages awarded. 800, 0. Immediate execution of judgment, with a lien placed not just on the president's personal assets but on the HOA's treasury itself. Pending the results of the state attorney's independent investigation, additional criminal charges would be considered. And as a final, devastating blow, she ordered the permanent dissolution of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, citing gross misconduct, fraudulent governance, and systemic abuse of authority. The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in the stunned, heavy silence of absolute defeat. The president sagged in his chair like a puppet with its strings cut, his lawyers staring at the judge as if hoping she might somehow take it back. She didn't. She just rose, gathered her papers, and left the room, the finality of her footsteps echoing off the walls. I didn't move. I sat there, breathing in slow, even draws, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. This was it. This was the end of them. The news spread faster than wildfire on a dry prairie. By sunset, half the town knew. HOA board members resigned en masse, their reputations shredded, their social standings obliterated. The properties they once bullied over sat in stunned, grateful silence. The president himself was left facing not only financial ruin but jail time. His criminal charges upgraded thanks to the firearm and the terroristic threats. His house, once the centerpiece of HOA smugness with its trimmed hedges and mandatory beige siding, went up for sale within 2 weeks. A must-sell sign, sagging on the front lawn like a white flag of surrender. But the real victory, the real, irreversible win, came in the mail a month later, a thick, official envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside, a court-certified declaration stating that my land, in perpetuity, was officially recognized as outside any HOA jurisdiction, immune from any future attempt at annexation, regulation, or control. The language was beautiful in its brutality, inviolable by the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association or any future derivation thereof. I framed that document, hung it on the wall above my fireplace where the old rifles used to sit, a trophy not of violence or rage, but of patience, law, and relentless will. The ranch healed slowly, like a body stitched after a long, bloody battle. The fences were mended. The barn was repainted, bright and stubborn against the horizon. Neighbors who once avoided my eyes now waved shyly from their porches. Some stopped by, bringing pies, firewood, awkward apologies. I didn't need their repentance. I hadn't fought for their approval. I had fought for my land, my family, my freedom. One evening, as the sun bled across the fields in long orange streaks, I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee and watched the wind stir the tall grass. No strange cars prowled the road. No notices flapped from the fence posts. No threats marred the stillness. Just peace, earned, paid for in full. In the distance, where the old boundary markers stood, a new sign gleamed under the setting sun. I had it custom made, installed it myself. Heavy steel, thick posts driven deep into bedrock. Private property. No trespassing. No OAAs. Ever. And beneath it, etched into the metal, a final warning to anyone foolish enough to forget. Some lines are drawn in ink, others in blood and stone. This land was mine, and it always would be.